Oh, okay. Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. We have a two-part meeting tonight. First part is the meeting of the hearing panel, which will act on a couple of requests for variances that are requested by the applicant. And on the hearing panel includes myself, Mr. Ponarelli, Mrs. Griffith, and Mr. Conley. So those will be the ones voting and hearing on the requests for the variances tonight. On the hearing panel, Mr. Hardcastle is a member of the hearing panel, but he's not able to make it tonight, so I'll run the meeting. So with that said, I'll call the meeting to order and call the public hearing to open, and we will hear from information from the applicant in terms of the dimensional requests that they're requesting. There are no use requests that are here. Everything that's being in the plan is allowed under the zoning. It's just there's some dimensional kind of physical variances that are being requested. So if the applicant would like to come up and explain the variances that are being sought tonight.
How's that? Better? Good evening, Nicholas Heeman from Darrow Everett on behalf of Marshall Properties. We are here today seeking a recommendation from the hearing panel on three variances, one related to signage, one related to fenestration, and one related to parking. And we have John Sell, who has put together the renderings and the pictures that you're looking at here, and he'll walk you through sort of what we're requesting on each one, as well as the reason why we're seeking the relief here. I think it probably makes sense to maybe start with parking, then fenestration, and then we'll take up signage as our third. So I'll turn that over to John and he'll walk you through it, and then we'll obviously be happy to respond to any questions. We do have representatives of Marshall here, owners. We have our engineer here as well, so we can draw on everyone's expertise to get you the information that you need this evening.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. Again, my name is John Selly with Phase Zero Design. If we could advance 2 slides, please, and then we'll come back to these. The first 2 have to do with signage, and we'll circle back to that. Okay, so the first of the 3 variances that we're requesting has to do with the parking counts across the site. And I'll just start with the fact that the overall shortfall, when we look at parking as a whole across the entire site, is just 12 spaces. So what's required is 2,345. What we're proposing is 2,333, so just that shortfall of 12 spaces. In terms of the specifics of it and why we're hitting that shortfall, a part of it is that we're looking at the ratio of parking for the multifamily residential components as a lower ratio than is what is required by zoning. We're looking at 1.5 parking spaces per unit rather than the 2 spaces per unit, which is required. We think this is reasonable for the type of multifamily housing that we're proposing on the site. We have around 60% of the units as either studio or 1-bedroom units. So that lower parking ratio, we feel is justified. And then on the retail side, the commercial side of the property, we have slightly higher parking ratios than what are required by zoning. So again, when you average them, sort of look at that overall count across the entire site, we're short just the 12 spaces. So why do we want this? If we can avoid building the extra parking, we would prefer to do so. We think the parking counts that we're using for the uses on the site are appropriate. If we have to build more parking to hit that two spaces per multifamily unit, it's just going to require that we have more impervious space, less open green space. Again, we would rather not build that additional parking that we don't feel is necessary if we don't. So that's the parking variance. If you could advance 1 slide, please. The second variance I'd like to talk about is the glazing percentage, which is a requirement that comes through the design guidelines. The design guidelines are looking for a minimum average of 25% fenestration as an average of all sides of each of the buildings that are proposed. The design guidelines also has a requirement for a minimum of 10% fenestration on any individual wall surface. So what we're proposing is hitting that minimum 25% on all primary frontages of all of the proposed retail buildings on the property. as we've, gone through the exercise of designing conceptually all of the buildings that are proposed, that was something that we were able to do. As we looked at these retail buildings, though, it was difficult to hit that 25% average on all surfaces. We are able to hit the 10% minimum on all elevations and all of them. It's just when you take that frontage and then the sides that don't hit that 25%, it's hard to hit that 25% average. So we have an example on this slide, and all of the drawings that I'm presenting tonight, by the way, are excerpted from the submission package that was submitted last December. So it's not new material, it's just been excerpted for the purposes of this presentation this evening. So the example with respect to fenestration that we have on the slide here is the grocery store. So it's the largest building, obviously, on the property. You can see that top elevation is the front, the major sort of frontage of the grocery store. We're hitting about a 30% fenestration percentage on that facade. We hit at least 10% on the back right and left sides of it. The back, we're just at 10%. Right side, we're at 13. The left side, we're at 23. So the overall average on that grocery store that we have proposed is about 20% fenestration when we look at all wall surfaces. And it's the difficulty here is really that the buildings that we're proposing are retail or restaurant. So there's a certain amount of program with those use types that we need some solid wall for. So you have, in restaurants, obviously back of house for kitchen spaces, storage, walk-in coolers, things like that don't lend themselves to fenestration. Similarly, on the retail side of things, you have a need for back of house space with some solid wall for that storage type function. So again, hitting the 10% everywhere, hitting the 25% on all major facades, just not hitting the 25% average across all. That's the relief that we're seeking on that. Sure.
What number are you asking the hearing panel to lower that minimum 25% to? Are you asking for them to lower it across the board to 10 or 20? I want to be certain we can pin down a number.
We're asking for 25% on all of the primary customer-facing frontages, and then the minimum of 10% on any other facade.
So minimum of 10% and not primary facade. Okay.
Correct.
Is that just on the commercial buildings in residential? You'll meet the standard?
This is on the commercial buildings, which is where we sort of most scrutinize this. And I think this is really where the design guideline came from, was to control the buildings that are, really sort of seen on the visible frontages of the property. I would say the residential buildings don't really come close to that 25%. And I think that 25% came from, you want a public commercial building to have a lot of storefront be open to, what's happening around it. Residential building where you just have punched openings for, windows into apartments, you're not going to get nearly close to a 25%. Okay, so that's those two variances. Now, if we could back up the 4 slides to the beginning of this presentation, we'll walk through the signage variance. Okay, thank you. So the requirements for signage, we're looking in two different places for these. In the design guidelines, it states that signage along the parkway should be limited to the vehicular entrances to the site and should not be internally illuminated. So that's the sort of language in terms of signage that we get from the design guidelines for the Metacomet sub-district. So as we read that, it seems to us that some signage at the vehicular entries to the property was contemplated at the time that those guidelines were written. And then when we look at the East Providence zoning, we see that pole signs and monuments are not permitted in the waterfront district. I think those regulations were, in place and written before the Metacomet sub-district came into being. So there's some question there in our minds as we look at that. The East Providence zoning goes on to say that signage for properties with multiple uses should be incorporated into buildings or should be incorporated into decorative wall signs that help screen parking in some way. So sort of balancing those two regulations that we have in front of us, we are proposing 2 monument signs on the Veterans Memorial Parkway frontage of the property. One at the, you can see on the graphic, the sort of enlargement of the blow-up plan. This is the northwest corner of the property with the proposed rotary. So we're proposing one sign, a monument sign right at that rotary that would be visible from southbound traffic. And then a second sign at the right turn only vehicular entrance further south of that on the property, which would be visible from northbound traffic. So we think both signs are necessary, given the visibility along the parkway. If you're traveling northbound, to get someone to understand what's in the property and to turn right at that right turn only, you need a sign at that vehicular entry. And then similarly for motorists traveling southbound, you need a sign at the rotary so that if you're coming south through the rotary, you see the signage that directs you onto Lyon Avenue and into the main vehicular entry to the site on that side of the property. Okay. So that's what's being proposed. Really, the reason we're asking for the variance here, why we need this relief. This is a unique property with the 100-foot buffer that we've been required through the design guidelines to maintain along Veterans Memorial Parkway. It means that all the buildings are set well back from the vehicular frontage to the property. And further than that, it's really been our intent as we've planned this property and as we've located the buildings on the property to face them toward the interior of the site, bring all of the larger buildings toward the middle of the site. And what that's done is really prevented any visibility from motorists on Veterans Memorial Parkway from seeing the buildings internal to the property. So the signage on the parkway is really necessary for prospective tenants of the development to have, just that basic marketing function of being able to announce to motorists passing on the parkway of their presence within the development further in where you can't see them from the parkway. Okay. And again, a sort of another way of saying that is that we felt it was more appropriate to have some reasonable signage on the parkway than it was to plan this development to put all of the buildings facing the parkway. We thought it was better to pull them back and just announce their presence with some signage. Okay, next slide, please, gives a little bit more detail on the signage that's being proposed. Thank you. Again, this is an excerpt from the submission. So these drawings were in the original submission since last December. So the top sign is the sign that's being proposed for the location at the Rotary. It's about 12 feet to the highest point of that sign from grade. It sort of occupies that corner. So you see that on the southbound as you come around the Rotary, as we saw in the previous slide. The sign below that is the sign that's proposed for the right turn only vehicular entrance off the parkway. The high point of that sign is at about 21 feet. We looked at the East Providence zoning requirements and other locations zoned for retail in the city. General business, for example, would allow a sign up to 25 feet. So what we propose, we feel is reasonable given other regulations in the city. Certainly nothing that's beyond any kind of an industry standard for retail development of this scale and this scope. Materials of these signs are proposed to match those used in the palette of materials for the town center. So we proposed a white cedar shingle on these signs, incorporating these signs into field stone walls for a decorative element at the base of them. Lighting is intended to be respectful. We took seriously the requirement of the design guidelines for no internal illumination. We are proposing halo lighting behind the logo and then a top light for the tenant signage that's incorporated into these. Again, intended to be discreet, respectful, high quality signage in keeping with the quality of the development as a whole. Okay. So that's what we have for our presentation on the variances. Certainly happy to answer any questions you might have. And thank you all again for your time this evening.
Thank you. So the larger monument sign is 21 feet at the highest point.
The taller one, yeah, they're close to the same overall size, but 21 feet.
And
the lower sign at the.
Just how wide is it? The width. You have a rough idea.
That one's roughly 9 feet wide.
Okay. All right. Any questions from the commission on fenestration, parking, or any other issues? So I guess we'll open it up for public comment, but my general opinion is that the fenestration and the parking are pretty modest. The sign, I do have some concerns with just the sheer size of it on the parkway. There's nothing on the parkway even remotely close to this. And, that you compare it to other commercial districts in the city, but the Parkway is a little bit different than, say, Newport Avenue or Pawtucket Avenue. So I reserve judgment on that until later on. But there's no other questions from the commission members. If there's some members of the public who would like to comment on these requests, they can come up now and speak.
Mr. Fazioli, just as they're making their way up, my colleague redistributed the Ashley Sweet report. I believe you've seen this before. It's part of our submission. It's part of what's been presented to the planning department on the 9th. So just like that included as an exhibit as part of the hearing, because it does speak to the variances in addition to what John
Is it
presented.
essentially the same substantive content, or is there any?
Yeah, it just gives you a full written report.
Read for quite a bit.
Right.
So anybody from the public would like to come and speak? Sir, Mr. Bowden?
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee and the hearing panel. My name is Dan Bodwin. I live at Kettle Point in East Providence, and I'm also here as a member of Keep Metacomet Green. The variances for the fenestration and the parking, they seem perfectly reasonable. Even the variance for a monument sign seems perfectly reasonable. However, it's the size of the sign. I have to echo some of the chairman's comments about that. The Betts Parkway is a very special street. And the whole idea is to try to make it conform with other signage. And you've seen them, but there's a picture of all the other signage that is along Vets. So I'm opposed to the size of the sign. 21 feet is much larger than any other sign that's on the parkway, without question. Also, the idea of identifying tenants on the sign is something that's new to the parkway, and there would be a precedent. I mean, there are other areas, for example, the office condominium project next door that might want to say, hey, I want to identify my office operations in there. So identifying the individual tenants is also setting a very precedent. There's nothing like that on the parkway right now. There is a stewardship plan for the parkway that you probably heard over the last year, and that plan refers to a really desire to try to make signage consistent and make sure that it's aesthetically reflective of the culture and character of the parkway. And a sign of this size certainly does not reflect that. The Rhode Island Scenic Roadway Board has to approve a lot of the changes that are going to happen. And while this sign may be on private property, they're going to look at the overall picture in terms of how that roadway is affected. And there's a lot of requests to go to the roadway board to approve a lot of changes there. And I really think they're going to look at the overall picture. And I don't think they're going to look at this sign very favorably. That would be my opinion. And finally, on 2 occasions, the consultant to Marshall had said at public meetings that there's a desire to work with the city to make sure that the sign is in character and in conformance with other signs that are on the parkway. And the consultant specifically referenced the development to the north, the office condominium complex. And we've seen that sign as a very low sign that just identifies the complex. So that was the developer's consultant, and that's what she said, and it's on tape. So I don't know where that fits in with the idea of this sign, because it certainly doesn't conform with the other signs that are on the parkway. That's my comment. Thank you. I think I submitted that for the record earlier, so you have a copy of that for the record. Thank you.
Dan, is your comment only for the 21-foot sign or for both? I mean, other than identifying the tenants, is the comment regarding the 12-foot height?
Yeah, the one by the roundabout, for some reason, I thought it was closer to the entrance, further away from Vets. This is really the first time I'm seeing that it's right on the roundabout. So I think that sign has to be looked at very carefully, too, in terms of how it fits in with everyone. So it is taller than the other signs, although it's not 20 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else from the public would like to comment on the requests being granted or requested? Okay. Any questions from the commission members? So the people voting on this would include myself, Mrs. Griffith, Mr. Parnarelli, Mr. Conley. I think we, at least I get a sense that maybe we have agreement on the 2 modest requests for parking and fenestration. So maybe we can take these up separately just to kind of space them out. So is there a motion to approve the request for the parking variance? Do I second? Any discussion on that?
I don't have an issue. I think the variance requests are very modest in scope and scale.
Okay, just on the parking request variance, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, that passes. Second variance request on the fenestration. Any discussion or concerns about the fenestration that was the request that's being sought tonight?
No, I think it's sufficient.
Do I have a motion to approve? Okay, second? Second by Mr. Ponarelli. All those in favor? Aye, so that passes. So last issue, the request for the signage variance. I think I said before the vote, this is the first time it's formally been presented to the commission. I know we've seen renderings. This is the first time it's been presented to the hearing panel. You know, I probably wouldn't be in favor of this particular design right now. Maybe there's an opportunity to revisit this or come back with a sign. I can understand the trade-off between the buffer and the buildings being set back, and I understand the commercial interest of having a sign, but I think in this case, there's more of a balance that could be sought at a few, maybe another rendering, another rendition, but I'll leave it up to the board to make a motion if they would like to vote on it one way or the other.
I share your concerns. I think the signs, the size are just so out of context with the rest of the parkway. I really have some concerns about it.
Yeah, so I'll ask legal counsel, rather than voting on it formally one way or the other, would it be appropriate to ask for an alternative submission at a future date?
At this point, with the commission meeting following this hearing panel meeting, my suggestion is we should take it one way or the other. Because the hearing panel is just making a recommendation to the full commission. But picking ahead to the we can either approve or deny or approve request for a variance, or if the hearing panel or commission is giving time as presented, we could vote to approve conditioned on, limited size, like height, square footage, or if can't provide that would not require anything.
Yeah, I think the difficulty is a lot of times in zoning variances, you have a zoning table that tells you the degree that it's over or exceeds the standard, and you can kind of quantify that. Here we don't. The standard is fairly subjective. We don't have like a table and say it's X% over a standard sign request. So, so at this point, is there a motion to approve or deny the sign request for a variance?
I'll make that motion.
Do
Deny.
I have a second? Any other further discussion?
So so the requested variance was for the installation of two monuments. These are variance because if you deny this, they would not be.
I don't know, would the applicant like to explain maybe perhaps another course of action?
Yeah, so Ms. Goins points out correctly, right? We need a variance to have a sign. Without the monument signs of some agreeable size and format, the development becomes very problematic, right? I mean, as you know, we're seeking a grocery store. It's going to be tucked into the development away from the street. It'll be hard to get a tenant who doesn't have a sign, right? So we have to have the signs. The two signs are critical. The ability to have our tenants on the signs are critical because of the way we've designed it to be sensitive to the greenery. I believe we can work with you on the overall height of the sign and to try to find a way to make it fit. So thinking ahead, as you said, to the full panel, certainly we'd rather have more time to work with you on this because a denial of a variance to have a sign at all puts a big wrench in this whole project, which I don't think anybody's really looking to do. So we're happy to have continuing, right? Well, within reason. So we're happy to have a continuing discussion with staff and the board and come up with something on that front, a design that's tasteful, a design that works. But from a practical perspective, the goals of the Waterfront Commission to have this be an economic boom, the signs are very, very, very necessary, which I don't think, my read is not that you disagree with that. My read is that we've got to figure out what the right size of that sign would be.
I think it's the dimensions and how it really, knowing what's on the parkway already existing and then driving down that road for the last 30 years, just knowing what that would, that would be a, something that's very unusual. And as Mr. Bowden said, could lead to some other requests for other tenants that would like to do something similar. So I think, rather than voting on it, I guess we would take a motion to maybe defer that to the Waterfront Commission and make it a condition of approval.
You do have to make a recommendation to the commission either way on this request. And the commission can choose to grant the deviation or could choose to defer that until a later meeting so that so if the commission were to approve the project and the other two requested variances, they would then have to come back for a separate meeting, maybe with revised signage plans. Alternatively, if, for example, the applicant could say, we'll agree to shrink the signs by, I'm just going to throw out a number, 30% or 50%, So I think you have a choice. I think the applicant has a choice and the hearing panel and the commission has a choice on how you want to proceed. It is just important with signs that we agree on an exact dimension. So if it's going to be different than the dimensions that have been presented, we've got to nail that down.
Okay, so we have a motion that's been made to and seconded to deny the variance. Are you suggesting we rescind that motion?
Well, I can say you could maybe just deny without prejudice so that they could resubmit a different sign, either design or dimensions.
That agreeable?
Yeah, again, I think as you pointed out, without the table, right? So I look at it as two components. Can you have a sign and how big can it be? So I think critically, if it's the will of the board, that it's the size and not the having of the sign, that I think an artfully worded motion that we got to figure out, it's not that you can't have the sign, it's that you take issue with the size of the sign without prejudice, that's fine. So that we can come back and figure out whether it's 21 feet, 18 feet, 8 feet wide, 9 feet wide, so on and so forth. There's a lot of things that we can work with you on in trying to get us across the finish line.
Okay, so I guess the motion would be, as Jennifer made it, is to deny the variance without prejudice.
I'll make that motion. I make a motion to deny the variance without prejudice.
I have a second. Any other further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Motion passes. Thank you for your cooperation on that. So I'll go ahead and take a vote to adjourn the public hearing of the hearing panel. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you. Public hearing for the hearing panel is concluded. Now we will open up the public hearing on the Waterfront Commission, which was noted for 7:30 and it's 7:31, so that's good timing. So first order of business, Chairman's opening remarks. Just want to say thank you for everyone for being here on a busy holiday season as we approach upcoming holidays. It's not an easy night for people to come and attend, but I appreciate your attendance. First order of business is to vote on the approval of minutes of October 17th, 2024. Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And I just want to note, as we enter the Waterfront hearing, that we do have a quorum, which includes myself, Mrs. Griffith, Mr. Pondarelli, Mr. Conley, Mr. Andrade, and Mr. Amoroso. So we have 6 members of the commission. So first item on the agenda after the approval of minutes is new business, continuation of public hearing on Metacomet Property LLC's application for proposed development located at 500 Veterans Memorial Parkway, map 107, block 15, and so on. I just want to note that the original application that was submitted to this body was in December of 2023. So it's been a full year that we've been here addressing this issue. So with that said, I'll turn it over to the applicant for any testimony that they can make.
Thank you. Again, Nicholas Heeman from Darrow Everett for the applicant. For this component, we have Deborah Cox is here today to give you an update as to where things stand with the archaeological issues, state historic preservation, and the hopes we have tonight is, as you noted, it's been a year, that to the extent we can get a vote of approval, as much as we can get approved today, given the situation with the sign, we'd like to try to do that so that we can continue to advance this project down the field. So with that, ask Deborah to come up and she can share with you where things stand with the archaeological issues.
Good evening. So if you remember, we conducted a phase 1 archaeological survey and identified areas of pre-contact or Native American campsites and living areas. Subsequent to that, we went back and did phase 2 at the request of the State Historic Preservation Commission in several of the areas. That phase 2 included hand testing and machine stripping. We just completed that 2 weeks ago, not quite 2 weeks ago. It's 2 weeks tomorrow. The Native American representatives from the Narragansett tribe were with us every day, 2 of them. In some cases, they asked us to look at areas that we had not planned to, and we complied with that. Let me start by saying, in terms of the results, we did not find any human remains or any indication of human burials in the areas that we looked at. We did find what we referred to as features, living surfaces, storage pits, shell pits, fire pits. And we actually found indication that the area was traversed by people before 5,000 years ago, which I think is what I reported last time I was here. So that's not unexpected. I think I did say that there were tens of thousands of people living here over 12 to 15,000 years. So it only makes sense that we would find indications of human activity. So right now, because we just finished, the material that we did find, things like knives, stone projectile points, have been cleaned. They have not been cataloged. We just started our catalog. We have sent some material out to be carbon dated to try and get some exact dates. We can look at projectile point shapes and types and see how it relates to a known typology and how old it might be. So after we catalog our material and analyze the data, we'll be authoring a report. It will be ready probably the end of January. That report will be submitted to the State Historic Preservation Commission. And the next issue is whether or not any of the area is significant, is archaeologically significant. So depending on that determination that the State Historic Preservation Commission makes, obviously if they determine it's not significant, we are done. If they do think there might be some significance in some of the areas, they could request mitigation of the effect of the project on those areas. And mitigation is, we would excavate, gather all the information, and then the project would proceed. So, and the client is certainly prepared to adhere to anything that the state request in terms of mitigation options, if any of the area is considered significant. There is the question over most of the area of integrity. There are pockets of intact soils, but for the most part, what we did find was disturbance, filling, cutting that has occurred over the past 125 years. So that will all be in our report, and we hope to have adequate mapping that will show where those pockets of intact soils are and what they may contain. Questions?
Thank you. So basically, essentially, you've completed your field report. You're assembling a written report that will be submitted to Rhode Island Historic.
Right.
And at the same time, as that report's being prepared and submitted, members of the tribe have input into that report as well?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And then the final determination about any significance of activity lies with the Rhode Island Statewide Historic Preservation.
Yes, that's correct.
And then if they do find an area of material significance, one of the mitigation effort, do they do this to restrict development in certain areas, or they require further analysis?
Well, there's two options here. If there are areas that are not going to be impacted, then that would be it. They may ask, for example, if there's material in the buffer zone where nothing's going to happen, then we don't have to do anything else. If there's material of significance that is in the building areas, they would probably ask us to excavate it all. This is a phased approach, so we start small and it goes on. So we would collect the data in a professional manner before it could be destroyed. There is also an option of filling. So if that is possible in any of the areas where there may be significant archaeological finds, and it could be filled and paved over.
So the material you found here, is it typical to other areas that you've worked on in Rhode Island, or is it higher incidences of finding, or is it pretty much typical what you typically see in similar areas?
It's very typical. People lived here for 15,000 years. So it is very typical. So when you look at something like that, what can it tell us that we don't already know? And does it have integrity? Is it in good shape? It's not, a storage pit, for example, could be completely truncated. And so what we have is the bottom of it. And that really doesn't give us enough information. So.
Okay. Any questions from the commission members?
Just a question. You mentioned it would have to be dug up,
Yes,
and then it's removed.
it's removed. There's another report, and that's the end of it.
Anyone else? Thank you. We'll have a opportunity for the public to come up and speak after and ask any other comments.
So just on the archaeological component, I think for purposes of the municipal level, I think we've gone about as far as we can go. Right? I mean, you're going to submit everything to state historic, and then it's going to fall within their purview and their jurisdiction as to what, if anything, needs to be done. And we are going to have to work that out with them in the event that it's going to be a significant area. And ultimately, we'll have to comply with what comes down from the state historic. So I think in terms of where we're at, I think we're about as complete as we can get at this stage. And I think, hope it's at a level that's sufficient that the Waterfront Commission's in a position to make a decision on this component of it. I would equate it to, needing all state approvals, right? When you approve a development, you need a physical alteration permit from DOT, you need DEM, you need state historic. So certainly a condition of approval that we comply with how that process concludes, I think is fair, I think is reasonable, and I think is customary for developments that are at the stage. So
Yeah, I agree. That is a condition of the design review committee that the applicant comply with the directives of the Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission. So I think that's the recommendation from the DRC to the full hearing, for the full Waterfront Commission. So I can see that that's sort of the approach we'll take on this matter. So any other testimony from the applicant?
testimony, no. Like I said, to the extent it needs to be done for the separate record, we've given you Ashley Sweet's report again, which speaks to the variances that was prepared for the hearing panel. But in terms of testimony, that would be our presentation for this evening. When we get to the point of a motion, happy to come back up to make sure that we're going to be denying the variance without prejudice, that we just get that language right so that it.
Yeah, just a couple of questions and notes just to put it on the record. As like I said, we've been doing this for over a year. Very large scale development, probably the largest in the city's history. And the development phase is up to 10 years, very long period of development. Unlike a traditional planning review at the planning board, where you have a master plan review, which is conceptual, and then you come back with a preliminary plan review, which has a lot more detail and engineering, allows the board and the public to comment a little bit more on the project. Here at the Waterfront Commission, we have this sort of one step. We don't really have it segmented where you have master and preliminary. So, I think the reason why we spent a year on this is because before we give any votes on this, we want to make sure we examine a lot of other possibilities and allow for the opportunity to revisit items as the phases continue. The other distinguishing part of this project is that a lot of the development that we work with in the city is former industrial sites. They're somewhat isolated from neighborhoods. This is not Kettle Point. This is not East Point. This is not some industrial area or brownfield. This is, a very active site and a very active residential neighborhood. So I think that sort of justifies some of the extended review that we've taken here. I just had a couple of questions. I know on the unit count, 890, of which it was mentioned that about 526 will be studios or single bedrooms, which will minimize, I think, the traffic impact. But is about 308 and 56 2 or 3 bedroom units, which I think will be built in this latter phase of development. So I see that in phase 3 of the development, 232 of the units will be built. I think that's the initial residential phase, and 660, which will be in phase 4. Do you have a sense of timing of when phase 3 and 4 will take place, or is that sort of market driven?
Paul can probably answer that question.
Good evening, Paul Pisano with Marshall Property. It's kind of a tough question to answer at this point because of the total scale and who's going to come out of the woodwork first. I would say that, it'd be at least 3-4 years into it once we got all of the infrastructure in and so forth, that we'd start recognizing or looking towards that phase 4, if you will. Certainly, if opportunities present themselves sooner, we would like to come back and petition the board and try to move forward with it. But it's kind of hard at this point with the environment to look into the crystal ball and speculate exactly when that would happen.
Yeah, so I guess it would be fair to say that the initial construction on the site would be the commercial aspect, and then residential will be secondary.
Yeah, so right now, in that first phase of construction, there would be a residential component of 230 or so, if you will, but it would be predominantly the infrastructure, the roads, and the commercial.
And then I noticed on the at least initial submission that was prepared by Russell and Sampson, there were a number of age-restricted units too. I think about 240, which I think are more towards the later phases. Is that still contemplated as a sort of a business decision of the development?
Again, that area you were talking about at one time was perhaps assisted living we were contemplating, which is still very much in play. I think once we're so fortunate to get an approval on it, there will be a lot more people coming forward to have the discussions with us. But there has been some interest in the community that they've expressed, but that is still yet to be determined. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, one of the things that you're both very familiar with is that the approval of this project it lies with the property, not necessarily who owns it. So you have to kind of be mindful who eventually will be partnering with you or assisting with you in this development. So just want to kind of get some clarification on these things. So, and one of the other questions I had was, I know in part of the city council approval, there was a donation to the city that was contemplated, I think on Fort and Lyon. Oh, Fort and, I think Fort and Mercer, sort of that area. That only takes place upon the approval of a development plan, is that correct?
I'd want to defer the specifics of that, but it's my understanding that in the decision that was given to us upon approval of this particular project by this commission, that land would be conveyed to the city.
Yeah, I think it was conditioned on the development approval, so we could certainly ask the city solicitor.
9.6 acres in the northeast portion.
It runs down Fort Street down to, I think, Bentley. And then also on a little bit on Lyon as well. So, right. And that would be a public access point, obviously, once it's turned over to the city.
But what the trigger point of it is in terms of timing, I think is spelled out in the.
Yeah, the city
Council
ordinance. Yeah, I think I think I remember something about the approval of a development plan. So I guess we could ask the city solicitor what constitutes that. So. And last question on the residential piece. It seems like most of it is rental, not necessarily homeowner. At least the initial counts are mostly multifamily rental.
The majority of them are rentals, but we are contemplating a condominium area that would be in that last phase.
And then you've said on the record before that you would adhere to the 10% affordable housing, inclusionary affordable housing development.
That's correct.
Any other questions from the commission members?
I was just reviewing the zone change ordinance, and your recollection was correct. The land donation of that area the city council said that should be a condition to approval of any development plans for the property. Also, for the public, it's important for the public to realize that any changes to this property that differ from the plans that were presented, I think I'll say any material or any significant way would have to come back before this commission. So excluding the monument sign, which I guess we'll get to in a moment, if the applicant or a subsequent owner of the property wants to change anything in a way that conflicts with any approval, that would have to come back before the commission. And there will be a number of conditions to an approval, including receipt of any and all state and federal permits. There were a number of conditions recommended to the commission by the DRC, and questions were raised regarding who would be responsible for enforcing those conditions. The Waterfront Commission is the approving authority for this property. You're the authority with jurisdiction. So it would be up to the Waterfront Commission to enforce any conditions of approval, but obviously partnering with city staff, since we don't have our own, building official or engineering department, we rely on the city for that. So to answer the question of who's going to be responsible for ensuring that all these conditions are met, the answer is the Waterfront Commission is.
Okay, any questions or comments from the commission? I'll invite members of the public to come and speak and ask a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Candy Seal, East Providence resident with Keep Metacomet Green. As you've mentioned, Mr. Chairman, this application has been before you for a year. As Mr. Bodwin mentioned, the monument sign at the corner of Lyon Avenue and the Parkway. This is the first indication we've had in a year that that will be the location of that sign. Every other plan showed it at the entrance to the property on Lyon Avenue, which was quite a distance from the rotary itself. I urge you not to approve this tonight, to have another discussion about the signage, its location, its size. To have this sprung upon us at the very last minute, I don't think is appropriate. Thank you for your time.
Anybody else from the public would like to speak? Just come on up. You can stand in line if you want, so take your turns.
Heather Andrade, East Providence resident, KMG director. Where does I want to know where does the Veterans Memorial Parkway come in this plan? You guys haven't discussed it tonight, so. And plus you need the real borders, right? I haven't seen one yet.
I know you brought this up a number of times, Heather, and you're asking, I think, for survey markers of the parkway.
Yes,
whether
I
or not
am.
They own the property.
And also your discussion of the use of the property by a developer. I mean, that doesn't, where do the residents come in?
Well,
I know we've been over this.
The
I know
use
we
of
have.
the allowed uses of the property was decided at the zoning change that the city council made in 2001, I think it was. So that what is allowed as a use has already been approved and voted on as far as residential, commercial. That's all been, that was set in the zoning. So what they've applied for is entirely an allowed use. There's really no question about what the use, they don't need to ask for specific approval for the uses because the plan that they've submitted is in line with the allowed uses of the property.
Right, but I'm asking about the boundaries of the Veterans Memorial Parkway. There's only a topographical map made. So don't you think that we should know what we're cutting into, what we're using, which land we are using, who owns that land before somebody comes and destroys it? I don't know how, honestly, I don't know how anybody got into those and could cut into, DOT included, cut into those triangles that are over 100 years old. Where's the permit?
Well, again, for my understanding is, and I'll allow legal counsel Ray to, help me explain. My understanding is that the parkway is owned by DEM, but it's managed by DOT. Is that essentially how it is, or it may be the other way around?
You may have that the other way around, but that's, I think the relevant question for the commission is, do we have a survey of the property that's under the commission's jurisdiction? A survey of Metacomet's property or Marshall's property, known as Metacomet, was submitted with the application. So the boundaries of the roadway are not relevant to the commission's decision unless the state comes in and says, hey, we have a survey, we disagree with the survey that's been submitted, or another adjacent private property owner. I don't think we have that here.
Am I mistaken that the DCR included the Veterans Memorial Parkway in that plan, right? In their approval? Or the planning board, should I say?
Discuss it at the BRC.
The survey that was completed by a surveyor. They have title insurance on that.
No, I'm not
surveyor.
talking about, I'm talking
On the
about.
survey. So let me finish.
Okay.
please.
Sorry.
So the question is this property was properly surveyed. They have title insurance on it. And the property is what's in question, not the parkway. So anything that's being changed, they have to prove. So anywhere where the roundabout is will be part of their survey. But the property itself was surveyed, submitted, and insured.
I think I'm being misunderstood. I want to know, seeing as how they're going to be using, they want to change the parkway, right? Marshall wants to change the parkway, right? They want to use that land. What are the parkway's boundaries on both
I
sides?
believe in order for them to change the land, they need the approval of state DOT. to do that. So that was something they'd have to seek approval from the state for, to use that portion of the road, that state land, to create a rotary. or
Well, then
have
the other
approved
boards
by the
can't
CRTC.
include the approval with Veterans Memorial Parkway in it
Oh, I
until
think-
they get that,
I
right?
think in one of the conditions of the design review committee was that the applicant will receive final approval, necessary permits from all state agencies, including the Rhode Island Department of Transportation, Scenic Roadways Commission, and the CRMC. So I think that's pretty much the extent that we could bind the applicant as far as their ability to make those changes to the parkway, is to seek those consents from those governing bodies that oversee it.
Okay, thank you.
So as part of the DRC, Crossman made several presentations regarding the roundabout and the process at which we started with, we're continuing with, and what ultimately approvals that we have to get before anything can be approved. That process is in play right now. It's a condition, as Mr. Fazioli just mentioned, on the approval of the project. So that roundabout will not be constructed until we get 100% approval from Rhode Island DOT and Historic Scenic Highway and anyone else associated with it. So that process, it's not in our control. We've submitted the paperwork. Not we, I speak, Crossman has submitted the paperwork. So ultimately, when we get those comments back, that will guide the direction of that work. So it's a condition. If we don't get the approval, it doesn't meet the condition.
Please introduce yourself.
My name's Kevin Stediger. I'm an East Providence resident. And from what you've just been saying, kind of interesting that if they don't get the roundabout, then there's going to be some kind of alternative entrance into the new development. Number one. Number two, the development itself, and they were just talking about it tonight, that the Native Indians, they weren't here to put their input as to what was actually found on the property. That would determine whether or not there would be any different situations as far as the development of the property. That kind of interested me. I live in the Fort Street, Lyon Avenue area, and I've noticed that there's been a lot of work done. They've been cutting trees and doing development, or not development, but they've been doing a lot of things in the area that's supposed to be kept as natural, just kept natural. And I know for a fact that there was an owl nest in the area, and I don't know where the owl has moved now. I know it did move from the area of that corner down near the school, and now I have not heard it in quite a while. So there's a lot of things that are going on that that bother me as far as the whole, the developing this area. On top of the fact that I don't think we need another grocery store in the area. I think there's a lot of vacant storefronts in the area already. I know there's a lot in Riverside. There's a lot in East Providence that I really don't think that we need this right now. And these are things that have been bothering me that I've seen on the internet, and which finally forced me to come in here tonight and to talk to the council. And hopefully that you'll think about it and see that maybe some of the things that that I'm seeing that are making sense. And I want to thank you for your time.
I thank you for coming. I think I just want to clarify a few things. So I believe the representatives of the Native American tribe have been involved in the archaeological dig, so they've had input into the report. And I know that there's been some clearing of utility line near the utility lines. There's some tree clearing over the last year or so. But that work's not been performed by marshals, right? That's by National Rhode Island Energy, whatever they're called. So if I'm not correct, please. And then, so there has been trees cut kind of where the towers are, but that's really, the National Rhode Island Energy has an easement where they can clear those, where the power lines are. But I don't recall of any trees being cut within the property or within the buffer. You dropped something behind you. So, so yeah, but you bring up good points, yeah. And I understand that, it's a big change for the neighborhood and a big change for the community in terms of having a site that's been, passive recreation for over 100 years to do something that's not passive recreation. And we can argue about the need for a grocery store, but it's really an allowed use, and it's their decision if they would like to invest their money that way. That's what they do. So, but go ahead.
My name is Roy Miller. I have a business and store with frontage on Veterans Memorial Parkway, and I drive by this property every day. I also happen to make quite a bit of signs for businesses, and this conversation about the size of the signage caught my eye. We talked about the relevance of comps in the city and the size of signs. And a lot of the areas where you just talked about the speed limit is 25 miles an hour. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, was this, or tell me, is the speed limit going to stay 40 miles an hour on Veterans Memorial? So that has a pretty large bearing on the size of a sign. And if it is the intent of the commission to preserve the economic viability of the commercial store in that area, honestly, even with the size of the sign as it is, what they're proposing, at 40 miles per hour, if you have text that is 9 inches tall, which I've been looking at the text here on all these things, the Crescent Park, our own city hall, the front of this building, talking about in some cases text that is nearly 2 feet tall. And again, that's viewed at 25 miles an hour. At 40 miles per hour, 9-inch tall text, which is not that big, but that's about what you're going to get when you actually write out across the width of the sign they're describing. You'll be able to see it read it for 7.7 seconds. That is actually a very, very short period of time. And that's about 450 feet away, where it will be actually visible to somebody to make a decision, am I going to make a turn or not? I think the speed of that road has to be considered in the size of the sign. If you intend to have people being able to actually use a sign in a functional way, you can't shrink it down. It just does absolutely nothing except for muddle up a space with a blurry thing you can't read until you're right on top of it. Something to consider if you want to actually connect the dots between something that's functional and not. As I said, and this is something that's even going on with our building and our tenants that want to open up a creative co-working space. Our sign, just for one thing, which is 2 words, is like 9 feet across. And that's just one occupant with 9-inch tall letters right at Veterans Memorial Parkway. So I hope that's helpful in thinking about the viability. As a small business owner and also as a landlord for small businesses, every little thing, this death by 1,000 cuts, it will be really challenging if they don't have a sign that is actually functional. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Did you do those calculations in your head, Rory? Just
Chat GPT.
Okay, great. I'm gonna say that's pretty impressive. So, anybody else, please come up and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Katie Cavalieri. I am terrified. I've never done this before. I have been one of the many people that have been behind a computer screen, super upset about this, and I decided that I just had so many questions that a lot of us have, and I've not attended before, which is shame on me. But one of my concerns is with the children that go to school over there, they would go to Hennessy, correct?
Most likely, yes.
Okay. So the reading and the math levels there are already on the lower side. I'm just nervous that if we have more bodies in the classroom, it's going to take away from the children that have, you know, benefit from the smaller size. Like that's one of my concerns. But we also can't figure out a traffic circle right now. So it creates a whole lot of traffic as it is. It's just a parkway is like open scenic land, and it's just ripping it all away. And then if like the traffic already is atrocious. Who decides does Marshall decide the rent for the tenants?
Yeah, these are private properties,
Sure.
so they decide the rents. for
Okay.
their tenant.
What is considered a low, I don't think I'm saying it right. Like,
Affordable housing,
Yes,
yeah.
thank you,
So
sorry.
essentially, there's a state law that dictates that the housing units, the rent can't exceed 30% of the person's income, and they have to have an income that's either between 80 and 100% of the area median income.
80% limit for rental units.
So so if you take a survey of the immediate neighborhood and say that the average income is $50,000 for a family. So they'd have to do the math and say, well, somebody making 80% of that, the rent can't be more than 30% of that person's income. So that's I know the affordable housing gets the difficult concept. People think what exactly it is, but essentially the state law gives you the range, the percent of income that the people made in the area that make in the area. So they'd have to take a look at the median income in the Fort Street area, Lyon Avenue, Mercer Street, Juniper, Mercer, and then the rent can exceed the 30% of whatever that their median the monthly income is.
I believe it's actually based less on what the immediate neighbors make and more on a census unit area, which I think we're in the same census unit as Fall River. So there is a neighborhood basis to it, but it is not, I think, as granular as surveying I just want to make sure they don't expect to be surveyed.
Okay. I'm sorry. So there is a benchmark of it has to reflect the incomes within the area.
Okay. Will small businesses be able to afford rental space there? We talk so much about our community and like supporting mom and pop shops. And like you said earlier, this is a huge difference for a neighborhood that's got lots of kids, lots of families, lots of animals, and it's massive. It's just huge. So I can't imagine that rent for a small business would ever be obtainable, which doesn't really support the locals.
Yeah, I don't know what the rents for commercial. We don't have any control over.
Well, I understand
rents,
that, but it's just
I think your point being that if what impact it would have on small businesses. The city does have a couple of corridors that are doing pretty well, attracting small businesses. Taunton Avenue, Wilkes Point Avenue, Waterman Avenue is becoming quite an active area with small locally owned businesses. So, I think the city's been able to attract that and show that it's a market. And I think one of the best things you can do for small business is to attract customers, and that means people. And I think a city where the population's been stagnant for a number of years, the more people you can bring in that can support a local business is really the best way to help a local business, at least in my opinion.
it's just kind of hard to support local businesses when there's big box stores around that have cheaper, better prices because it's just easier. But I actually had one last question. How is emergency services going to handle the influx of residents? Because we already rely on mutual aid a lot.
Yeah, that is a good point. I know there was a presentation by the fire department, I think it was at the DRC last month, or whatever it was. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Steve.
Yeah, they made a presentation on the impact of the amount of residents, customers, tenants, and the impact on the community. And part of that report also addressed how many school-age children would be put back into the system, what the impact would be on fire, police, et cetera. And all of those reports are available on the Waterfront Commission site. And they felt that they weren't detrimental to the community.
Already relying on mutual aid a lot.
This,
So how,
this building is also, as part of that report, it also talks about the amount of income that the project is going to generate, which will offset some of the additional costs that would need to be from education, fire, and police. So those reports are available to read. We have reviewed them as part of the DRC and felt that they were acceptable from our end.
And then, I know, I obviously, we all live in the city. We're all city residents, and we see the increased calls for ambulance services, and we do see the reports of mutual aid. And it's something I wrestle with because, we have 3,000 less people living in our city today than we did in 1980. So it's kind of hard to understand why there's such a demand on our public services when there's physically less people. Speaking to public safety officials over the years, I think the aging population certainly is a big part of it, is that we have an older population that requires higher services. But I think people tend to call the fire department a little bit more frequently now than they did, say, 10 or 20 years ago for maybe 911 when it's not necessarily an emergency service. But, obviously if they call, they have to respond. So I think that's part of the explanation. I've seen that happen in a number of cities around Rhode Island. So, but it is something that we're very concerned about. We do hear the input from the fire chief. I spoke to him quite a bit after his report, and if there is a need for additional services, the city council will have to take that up in budget deliberations.
thank you.
Sure. Oh, you did a fine job. You shouldn't have. Anybody else?
Hello again. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for listening to me. Dan Bodwin, Kettle Point, and also Keep Metacomet Green. Just a couple of comments. I really want to thank the members of the Design Review Committee. I don't know how many meetings you had, but they were really very informative and very open and transparent, and it was a good process. And I want to congratulate the committees about that and thank them for the many hours of service. I do have a couple of specific ideas on your conditions. One condition 3 talks about updated noise and traffic and public sector impacts upon completion of various stages of the project. And it reads, bear with me here, earlier to occur at completion of phase 2 or the beginning of phase 3. And I'm going to suggest that the most important study in the interim period will be upon completion of phase 2, the commercial area. That's what you really want to measure in terms of noise and traffic. And if for any reason phase 3 starts before phase 3 ends, which is a possibility, then that's not what is reflected in your condition. So that could be one change to consider. The other one is on number 10, where you talk about the state agencies that are have to be approved. And you mentioned RIDOT and CRMC, and you mentioned other agencies, but you don't mention specifically DEM. And I think it's important that DEM gets recognition. After all, they're the ones who took title to the Veterans Memorial Parkway from the Metropolitan Plan Commission back in the 1930s. So that whole area is really co-managed by RIDOT and DEM, I think on an equal basis. Sometimes you're not sure who you got to talk to for what even, but I think everyone should understand. I think DEM is going to play a large role, or should play a large role in what happens to the vets. Then I have a couple of comments about pedestrian ways and connections and how it may relate to, you can't see this, but this was the plan that was attached to the zoning ordinance as a condition that the city council said as a condition, let's see, number 7, that the property owner will integrate paths throughout the development, constructed and maintained at their expense providing for connectivity between the property and the abutting neighborhoods. And it goes on to say the paths will be shown on plans as approved by the city. Now, there was a plan attached to that. It's recorded in City Hall, and I don't know if that's the plan that they were referring to, but there are differences between this plan and what is actually presented at Marshall that's in front of you. One of the biggest differences, the plan calls for connection between 4th Street and Bentley Street, pedestrian connection into the project and through the project. And you would think that's something that everybody wants, connectivity to the neighborhood. But I think the plans right now just show an emergency access point there. It doesn't really show a pedestrian way that comes in off that 4th Street neighborhood. So I think that's something that you should look at. The plan also calls for a walkway between the golf course and along the edge of the golf course and along the edge of the developed area. The plan that's in front of you takes that about half the way, but not the whole way. And then the third thing is the plan shows the connection across the the parkway, by the amphitheater area over to the East Bay Bike Path parking lot. Now, the suggestion of that pedestrian way was also made by PAR Engineering, that be looked at closely. PAR Engineering, of course, was your peer review engineer. He worked for the commission. And then the planning department also suggests that could be looked at closely. So I'd be interested, maybe it's not your role, but I'd be interested in seeing if that could be looked at. I think in some cases it's just been discarded saying, oh, the site distances aren't right or whatever, but I think it requires some detailed evaluation. The more safe pedestrian ways we can make between this development across the parkway is positive. And it's going to be very challenging with that 4-lane roundabout and 4-lane parkway, sorry again. So I hope that can be encouraged, and just take a good look at it. What are the alternatives? And is there a way to connect over the parkway in that area? Because there's only 2 lanes of traffic there. So that makes it easier just on that service. So those are my comments.
Yeah. Dan, you bring up these points, and I think you would agree a lot of these things that you're bringing up usually can be vetted out more at the preliminary plan, process once you get to more detailed engineering. So we don't really have that step here at the waterfront level. So we have to build in some ways to continue to keep the dialogue going at some point. So I think that's the spirit of what you're trying to do, is to, even though it's not in front of us today, how do we, keep those elements relevant as the development continues?
Yeah, the encouragement of that 4th Street connection, I'm not sure why that's not in the plan. I mean, it would seem to benefit everybody. So I don't know why it's not.
The reality is that if and when the city takes over that chunk of property there on 4th Street, the fence will come down, the barbed wire fence will come down, and I assume the city's Park and Recreation Department will allow, for some access on 4th Street or Bentley Street into the development area. So,
well, if there is a tie-in there, like maybe access that leads to a parking lot,
right?
That's the issue.
Okay.
But anyway, thank you once again. Take care.
Any other questions, Rory?
I wanted to touch upon the issue of housing, and since it was brought up by the other speaker, and I thought maybe to connect another dot, property values in East Providence have gone up 69% in the last 5 years, largely of which has been passed along to the same extent to renters. And something, we've talked about them being here for a year, and all these gentlemen are not working for free, and ladies, which adds to the cost of that project. And if it's not explicitly obvious, all those costs get added to the development, which then gets put into their required rate of return, which ultimately gets passed on to the renter, whether it be the small business or the tenant. And I'm wondering if I was on this commission, I think it would be an interesting question to ask is, how can we make it a more affordable project for them to develop, so that way we can get concessions for the tenants by bringing down their costs? For example, parking spots have a dollar value. So it's usually the going market rate's like $4,000, sometimes $6,000 per parking space. That's a substantial amount of money. And if are they absolutely needed? And if we give them more parking relief, what can be passed on to create sustainable long-term savings for people who can potentially occupy those spaces. The more time we add to this, how much time does that add to their cost? And how much does that get added on to prospective occupants? So how can we make this moving forward as quick and expedient as possible to reduce the cost for them and also reduce the cost for the ultimate end users, which are the people of our community who have already experienced tremendous housing, unsustainable housing cost gains. Whether that be parking relief, whether that be what happens if they're allowed to add another 40 units or 10% more units, can we get a concession that says, yeah, we'll do 15% of what, just that kind of conversation needs to be had, because that's the kind of negotiation we'd be having. A sign, come on, like it's money that is being torn out of the pockets of average East Providence citizens because there's not enough housing. We're only going to put people and let people stay in this city if we give them a place to live. And when we're making it more expensive for people who are trying to do it, who are we serving? I mean, the community, it's not going to be us. It's going to be people coming in that can afford this new price of the community. And so anyways, I want to have a day where my kids, the kids of my Little League team, all of us can afford to be in this city. And that only happens when we connect the cost that we put on people trying to invest and get their required rate of return and what they can ultimately provide at that price of investment. So anyways, I don't know if that helps or looks at it a little bit different light, but I'm not trying to put money in anyone's pocket by any means, but I'm trying to put it in the citizens' pockets, which is we're kind of on we don't have a choice if we want to live in the city right now. We just have to keep on footing the bill. So thank you.
Thank you. There's somebody else. No, that's.
Hi, my name is Denise Lindquist. I live on South Broadway. The development is horrifying, but that's moot because I don't think you really care about the residents. But I'll have to tell you, the wildlife there is incredible. You see great blue herons, egrets, mallard ducks. At the edge of my property, I can walk down to the water, and I kayak there, and there's a horrifying amount of trash in that cove. And I can only imagine what's going to happen once there's construction and, there's open dumpsters and people having lunch. I mean, will this property be held responsible for keeping that waterway clean? It's also an estuary, which is a very, very important part of the environment. And I'm not looking forward to hearing noise and backup trucks beep, beep, beep for years and years and years. And the amphitheater pointed right in my backyard. So I'd like you to consider these things, and certainly most importantly, to hold Marshall Properties accountable for what they will be doing to that code.
What amphitheater are you referring to? No, there is on this property some acoustic, small, not like a big amphitheater. So there's a proposal for an amphitheater across the street someday down by the Bow Point project. Yeah. So, yeah. So, right. Yeah. That hasn't even come before us.
The important thing to me right now is to be responsible for the beautiful, the amazing wildlife that abut their property, and also I'm very curious to what they're using for weed products. Is it Roundup? Is it a natural product? I mean, as a resident, I think I should be able to understand that.
Yeah, I assume. Yeah.
Bermuda grass in my lawn. Doesn't really bother me, but that just shows you how that golf course affects my. And how will it affect my property value? Not the.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak to the type of landscaping material they'll be using, but I assume the golf course over 100 years of operation used some sort of chemicals or whatever. So I don't know if that'll be a drastic change in what you've experienced, but the portion of the development is really not going to be anywhere near the cove. It's really going to be upland, up more towards Fort and Lion.
Trash flies,
Okay.
will they be held accountable?
Well, they've
They're out there now. I mean, I pull out, I'm not
right.
trash.
Where does that come from?
Actually, you could probably water of that code. And they should be held accountable for the trash that's gonna blow, and that their dumpsters should be closed.
Yeah, there is a requirement in our where the dumpsters are screened and closed, and obviously they can't have free flowing debris. Um, all I can say is that I'm familiar with the cove. I walk the bike path myself quite a bit, and I do see a lot of wildlife there. Yes, especially early in the morning when there's not a lot of other activity in the area. But the golf course did operate for 100 years or so as a pretty intense commercial enterprise. They had a banquet facility, a dining hall. There was activity there, and I think the property, for overall, is maintained a certain natural state. And I think that the fact that half of it's still going to be a golf course, and if the golf course ceases to exist, I believe the property has to go into a conservation easement where no development can take place where the existing 9-hole golf course is. So I think we did as much as we can protect that area from development.
Okay, thank you for listening to my concern.
Mr. Chairman, Andy Seal again. Thank you for a moment. KMG submitted a memorandum on the historic significance of the Veterans Memorial Parkway. I request that that be made part of the record. Thank you.
Okay, I think you emailed that to Ray, right?
I did,
Okay,
yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
I'm sorry to bother you,
No, not a bar.
but I probably should have waited till the end anyway to listen to everything. But one of the things that interested me was you said that Marshall would be the ones that would determine what the rents would be. So if their rents would be too high for a small business to afford, then you're looking at more vacant storefronts, number one. And then number two, the other thing that the young lady with the red hair, the festive red hair, brought up was the schools and whether or not they'd be able to sustain the additional people that would be coming into the area. But those are the only two things that I
Sure. No, very good points. I mean, again, I think everyone recognizes that with the lower population, we also have a drastically lower school enrollment. Back in 2000 and 2001, the school enrollment was about 6,600 kids in East Providence. The last set of numbers I had from 2023 to 2024 is about 5,300. So enrollments are lower than they have been. People just aren't having as many children as possible. A number of these units are 1 or 2 bedroom units, so typically don't lead to a lot of school age children. And even if they did, I'm okay with additional kids in the city. I know that's a very controversial statement, but I find kids, rather amusing. So.
I'm Renee Chacoin, live at Kettle Point. I have more of a process question, and Attorney Goins, you did address it a little bit this evening, that there's a lot of approvals happening with conditions. And when this happens, Marshall must do this, or there's this condition. And I, as a former project manager and process person, I sit in the audience and I say, but who's watching that? who's knowing that all of these conditions are met? If they change the plan, how do we know that they changed the plan? Like, what are the controls that are in place to ensure that every condition, you're approving things with conditions? How do we know that those conditions are happening, or if the plans change, that they are coming back to the commission with the revised plans? I just need to, as a resident, understand what those controls are to ensure that all those things do indeed happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, and Amy, you can add in, but as being in the planning department with the city, that as a development comes in to pull a building permit, typically the Waterfront Commission executive director has to sign off on the permit as it's filed with the city building inspector, and it's actually an automated system that permit is routed automatically to the executive director, and he has to sign off, or he or she has to sign off on that permit, and as part of that due diligence, there is a process to make sure that whatever conditions have to be met before building can commence, that these things are in place. And a lot of times permits are held up because they haven't met the conditions. And I know that for a fact is taking place at Kettle Point, at East Point. So there are mechanisms in place to ensure that any development that deviates from the plan that was approved, that was submitted to a public body, has to come in place. I think Mr. Miller probably has experience with her. A plan was submitted and then it just gets held up, and so there are checks and balances with that. So I know firsthand, but I don't know, Amy, if you wanted to add anything.
Only thing that I have to add to that is that each of the state agencies that have jurisdiction over this project have a similar process for enforcement and review to ensure development doesn't take place without the required permits. And if it has, then there's a process in place for that.
Are the 10 conditions that the DRC put on the approval permit related though? Or are they just more general? They're all permit related, all 10 of them are permit related, so they fall into that category.
So the applicant's going to need to provide us either revised drawings, written approval, or I'm sorry, not written approval, written documentation of how they addressed each one of those items. They can do them one at a time. They can do all 10 as we go. But similar to the process that we went through in the DRC, we kind of went from the top and checked them off. So as they feel they get through the process, they'll come in, we'll review them, make sure, we'll check that one off, and we'll just keep moving until they satisfy all the requirements. As Mr. Fazioli says, it won't go forward to permit. So the problem is we just can't keep having all these meetings until they need time to respond. So if we could continue to have these meetings in perpetuity. So by putting these requirements in place, we give them the opportunity to respond.
I think for a project of this scope, it's also reasonable for the Waterfront Commission to consider, say, in 2025, we ask the applicant to provide the Waterfront Commission with monthly status updates on, status of required state permits. And then the Waterfront Commission can then communicate that to the public on whatever basis is appropriate, monthly, quarterly, however fast or slowly things are progressing.
Status reports are always good.
Anybody else from the public? The applicant would like to make any closing remarks?
I don't know what more I can say that hasn't been said over the last 11 months, or I think we were talking earlier that we started all this in 2019. I think this has been about as well vetted a project that a public body can do. We've tried to be as responsive as we can. That golf course was not a part of the original proposals that we made. There were uses in the zone change process that were removed because of responsiveness to concerns from the public. Everything about this project has been done in collaboration. It might not be perfect. I'm not sure that I know what perfect would be, but I think it's a great project for the city of East Providence. It's certainly a generational project for everybody involved, including the commission. And if, obviously we can answer any questions if the public comment generated any additional questions that the commission had. But we are hoping that you'll approve the variances. Obviously, the signage is something that we still have to deal with this evening, but we would request an approval from the commission, subject to the conditions and subject to the state approvals and subject to landing the plane on the size of the sign so that we can continue to move this project forward. We can continue to generate the economic impact that will be favorable, not just to the city, but to the entire state, and get going. I mean, we want to get going on the next phases of the project. And I think the phase one aspect of it, which is the golf course, which has been approved and which has been under operation, is reflective of the quality of what this whole project will be about. Not everyone's a golfer, I understand that, but if you've had the opportunity to experience it, it's been first rate. And everything about this will continue to be. In terms of just the small business component of it, I mean, part of our work over the last year has been very much reflective of the fact that we don't intend this to be just big box retail. It's intended to be small business. It's intended to have local business. Rhode Island is a small business state. It's a hard place for big box to make it work. It's a hard place for chains to make it work, whether they're stores or restaurants. So this development and its tenant base will be reflective of the city of East Providence. It will be reflective of the state of Rhode Island. Nobody wants empty storefronts, especially the people that are investing millions of dollars to make this project happen. So that, Mr. Chairman, if there are any other questions, we have our engineers, we have our historic consultant, we have our development team. If there's anything more that you feel remains unanswered across this entire process, and we thank the commission and all the subcommittee work that's been done to get us to this point.
Thank you. I don't have any additional questions or comments.
So if the commission approves this without the requested monument sign variance, is the expectation that the applicant would come back to the commission for a public hearing before the hearing panel and then the Waterfront Commission just on that variance?
I think that would be the only thing left on the table, whether you do it as it's approved and we can't build the sign until we've gotten approval for the size of the signs. I think that would work. I don't want to have to meet, Amy, the substantial change threshold, because obviously it's not like we just tried to ram this home after months and months of being told, no, it's too big, no, it's too big, no, it's too big. So that sign, we were actually looking through it while we were here tonight, has been in the original plan. I know it came up, but we never saw it before from some comment, but the signage has been in the presentation all along the way. So we'd like to get that right, certainly, whether it's as a condition of that component, maybe that's the most efficient. Before the sign goes up, we come back to the commission for approval of the dimensions of it.
I think that's a prudent way to proceed. So I think, like you said, we've had 11, 12 months of meetings and subcommittee meetings, and I don't remember how many peer review studies we've had, Ray, but probably more than ever in any other. So it's been thoroughly vetted. We've had numerous iterations of the traffic study, the public impact study, the public safety study. So I think at least I'm at a point where I'm satisfied that the applicant has made a good faith effort to address the concerns, and still, even if there is a vote tonight, there's still 10 or 11 items that they have to adhere to in order to move ahead. So I know that the Design Review Committee sent the Waterfront Commission an advisory opinion to recommend approval with the 10 conditions. So I know that was discussed at the DRC on December 9th. So that'll be part of the record. So the conditions include a planning board recommendation of consistency with the comprehensive plan. I believe that's occurred. Keith, the hearing panel approval of variances, so that partially took place tonight. Updated noise, traffic, and public impact studies upon the earlier to occur of completion of phase 2 or the commencement of phase 3, that the proposed roundabout on the Veterans Memorial Parkway containing a pedestrian walkway allowing access to the East Bay Bike Path contingent upon approvals of all state agencies, that a construction management plan be developed by the applicant submitted to the commencement of construction of phase 2. The applicant shall hold informational meetings with members of the public to discuss the proposed construction management plan following its submittal to the city and building department and fire department. The applicant shall comply with all directives of the Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission in connection with and in response to the archaeological survey conducted at the property. All interior roadway construction and underground and above ground infrastructure located with both inside and outside the boundaries will be subject to the approval of these Providence Public Works Department, Water Department, Engineering Department, Fire Department as applicable. The applicant shall utilize a condominium homeowners association agreement satisfactory to the Waterfront Commission that will include but not limited to the following of maintenance of landscaping, streets, stormwater basins, utilities, trash removal, public access, and open space. The applicant will identify the pre-qualification services and ongoing certification for the need provided of on-site 10% affordable housing. We can just maybe add the word inclusionary there, if that's okay. And then the applicant will receive the final approval with necessary permits and the assent from state agencies, including Rhode Island DOT, Scenic Roadways Commission, and the Coastal Resource Management Council. And I don't know if do you have an objection to adding Rhode Island DEM for any involvement at all?
If applicable.
If applicable, yeah.
I mean, you need DEM approval if you need
Right.
DEM approval.
Yeah. Yeah, it's under CMC's jurisdiction, but, if there's any need for DEM, but I think they ceded oversight to CMC, so.
So then one other potential condition of approval would be with regard to the monument signs. If the commission wants to grant that deviation for that type, for 2 of those type of signs, with the condition that the applicant shall, the DRC shall approve a revised signage design, you could do that.
Yeah, as condition number 11, so.
I think it would probably have to be the DRC and then the Waterfront Commission.
Okay. And again, the issue with the sign was the complexity of this project was vast. So focus on the sign wasn't really until I actually looked at it and then kind of put it in my head what it looked like tonight and the proximity to the parkway. So it wasn't, it was just really just something that was not really 100% focused on, even though it was on the plate plans for the.
And that wasn't to be critical. That was just to respond to the idea that it had been said, not by the commission, that we just invented this evening. We have no problem having a further discussion on the dimensional aspect of the signs.
Right. And the only thing I would suggest is that in the item decision, point number 5, where they discuss the construction management plan, can we add and provide updates to the Waterfront Commission as requested?
Can those be written updates?
Yeah.
And then obviously, if you want us to appear, you could notice us.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do we close the public hearing? Or do we take a vote in public hearing? I always get that.
You can ask for a motion to close the public hearing first.
Well, I have a motion to close the public hearing.
That motion.
Seconded by Dominic. All those in favor? Okay, thank you. So with that said, we've had 12 months of this project under review. Like I said, it's for a number of reasons, very complex, quite involved project. And also we have to take into consideration other development that's happening in the city, down at Wampanoag Trail, up at East Point, Newport Avenue. There's just a tremendous amount of housing that's taking place in the city. So I think that's why the methodical approach of this was to not just see the impact within the waterfront or in this immediate neighborhood, but citywide, what's happening in terms of development. And there's, arguments for and against various development, but I think for a community to be experiencing this level of investment, I think it speaks to the health of the community. I think it speaks to the confidence of the community that people are willing to put money into the community because they feel this is a fiscally and economically sound place to make investments. So with that said, I'll take a motion to approve the applicant's request based on the 11 conditions that we cited, the 10 that were included by the DRC, plus the addition of requiring written updates. And I think what was it, 11? 11 was
Sign.
signage coming back to the DRC. So we have a motion to that effect. Second.
I'll second that.
Any discussion or comments by the commission members? All right, we'll take a roll call for that. Mr. Andrade? Mr. Amoroso? Mrs. Griffith?
And it's Miss Griffith.
Miss Griffith?
I don't have a husband out there anyway. Yeah, someone.
Okay, sorry about that. No,
It's okay.
I know. So, Mr. Ponarelli?
Aye.
Mr. Conley?
Aye.
And the chairman votes aye, so motion passes. Okay, next item on the agenda is, I believe, a staff report.
The Ivy Place Townhouse Lottery was conducted in the City Council chamber right here. The winning owners of 13 units were chosen, and they're all on their way of doing mortgages. Second, at the Design Review Committee of November 14th, there was a Metacomet project design was unanimously recommended to the Planning Board. Third, at the December 11th Planning Board meeting, the Metacomet project was unanimously recommended to the Waterfront Commission. Four, there was a pre-application meeting December 12th regarding the Live Nation submission on the relocation of Seaport Drive. And 5, there was a site visit on December 12th with the mayor at East Point to schedule a ribbon cutting ceremony sometime in January at the new model. That's it.
Thank you, Ray. When is the holiday party? Yeah, I guess we missed it, so.
Ray, one thing, when do you think Live Nation will be before the CRC? Yeah. Oh, microphone.
I would expect probably no earlier than 3 more months.
Okay, just wanted to get an understanding
Yeah,
where they're in the
right now,
process.
they're dealing with the relocation of Seaport Drive.
Okay,
That's what the meeting was the other day. And they're in front of DOT. I think DOT is conferring with the State Department, federal government too, because funding involved. I'm not sure about that, but DOT is amenable to what they want to do. And Audie Osgood and the pre-engineering, and submitting that to the state. Once that's submitted and the developer knows that they've got that moved or will be moved, then they can design their parking lot in the space that's being provided by moving of the road from east. And then I think you'll see some action. We will see some submission after that.
are they going to do a workshop before that, or
Yeah,
they
oh,
beyond
yeah,
that point? Yeah.
They've already had 2
Okay.
workshops here. Actually, 3. And
City staff, right? Yeah.
City staff, city staff, yep.
Right.
And they bring a team of about 20 people in when they do it. It's rest to a smaller group, or since getting smaller because of all of the consultants that are there to begin with. Said everything that they needed to say, and now it's getting the work done.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, but they will have to come before us for a pre-application workshop.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Eventually, but I understand that they're in serious negotiations with Billy Gilman to be a primary sponsor, speaker, as a performer. So I know that's something that they're working on, but I should have said that publicly, but yeah, it's something that the local guy here, so. Okay, thanks for Ray. Okay, I'll take a motion to adjourn. All
I'll
those,
second it.
all right, all those in favor?
Hi.
All right, happy holidays, everyone, and thank you for your work tonight and for the past year.